All right. Welcome. Welcome to class. I'm so proud of myself for finding that song. How many of you remember the show Eight is Enough? It's like only the older folks here are going to raise their hand. Vera, who steers this ship, had never heard of it because she's too young. But I had to find a song with eight in it because that's actually what we're going to be talking about today. Literally the number eight. Um, and I want to just admit that a little bit of a bias from the outset. Eight is actually my favorite number. You know how you're a kid and they like you're supposed to pick a favorite color and a favorite number. Eight has always been my favorite number, and that is partially because I was born in the eighth month, August, and on the 16th day, that's 2 times 8. I sort of noticed that, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm a child of eight. But it's also because primarily because Gary Carter, who was a catcher for the Mets, was number 8 when I was growing up. So that's actually like how I picked my favorite number. And so all of which is to say I'm a little biased in designing a whole class around this, my favorite number. But really, this class is about numbers and how we analyze numbers in the Torah, how we look at numbers in the Torah, and whether numbers are nothing more than units of counting or measurement, or we can understand numbers to have a kind of symbolism. And I'm obviously going to argue for the latter, or there wouldn't be a class. So let's say a blessing, and then we'll take a look at the numbers, the many numbers that appear at the beginning of this week's Parsha, Parshat Tazria, and then we're going to focus on one in particular. So let's say a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank God for the tradition that allows us to gather in this way and think and study. Okay, so the number 8. How do we get to the number 8? Well, before we get to the number 8, let's just talk about some of the big numbers in our tradition. It is actually not a stretch to say that numbers have symbolic meaning, and you know this because the big number in our tradition is the number 7. And in some ways that's part of what pushes the class to 8. I mean, it's very close. 7, no question. We could give a whole year of classes on the number 7. The Torah starts with the number 7. The days of creation are divided into 7, and that seems to matter because the 7 seems to be a special day. God rested on the 7th day. I probably don't have to say a lot about 7, but it sort of defines represents a paradigm for numbers that have repeating significance, that come to mean something independent of their simple quantitative meaning. The number 7 is forever associated with creation and with cycles of time, and so many of our cycles of time in this tradition are 7'd, and not just Shabbat, but many of the holidays, and even the 7th month is the month that has a lot of our holidays. The 7th year is the year of the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, the 7 times 7 years. Anyway, that's the obvious one, and there are others, right? What are some other numbers that are big in this tradition? Let's put some into the chat. Those are some big numbers in this tradition. 36, 40. What else? Jubilee, 400. 400 comes up a lot. I don't even know if Noah meant to type 400, but 400 actually does come up a lot. 10,
I did.
10 is a big one. 10 commandments, 10 plagues. So, and you know, some of these numbers we can sort of we can imagine why a 10 becomes a big number in Judaism. 10 is a big number in most numerical systems and most cultures, and the reason that is probably because we have 10 fingers, right? So like is the easy way to count. So some of them are intuitive, like when you see the number 30, you think, oh, month. I'm seeing, 365 in the, yeah, that's a significant number. And the rabbis thought about that number. But some of the numbers that are important in our tradition don't seem particularly universal. There isn't an obvious reason why we would in fact, it's not so clear why 7 itself is such a huge number of distinction in our tradition. That the week, as opposed to the month and the year and the day, is not a natural cycle in the world. So that becomes a number that is, and again, we could have a whole class on 7, but that becomes a number that is distinct in itself because of its placement and context in our tradition from the very start. Okay, I wrote about this week, and I'm sort of like you've noticed I'm using this class as a way to also promote my weekly essay for Hadar, and I wrote this piece this week on Parshat Tazria about these sorts of numbers, because Parshat Tazria opens with a whole slew of numbers, some of which are familiar to us and some of which are very unfamiliar to us. So if you want my valiant attempt at decoding the numbers in Parshat Tazria, take a look at this essay here afterwards. But let's take a look at the numbers themselves and see what it was that I was dealing with. And as I said, in this class, we're going to drill down on one of the numbers, in particular, the number 8. So let's just take a look here. Now I'm going to give you, hold on, I should give you also the source sheet. So let me do that. Source sheet for today. And as I'm doing that, let me say one other thing, which is that there is actually, I just suggested one method for what am I talking about here? For reading numbers, so to speak. That is interpreting the symbolic meaning of numbers. And one method for doing that is to ask, well, are these numbers in the natural world that would occur, to any human being or observer of nature? That's one way of doing it. The other, and maybe the most classic way of reading numbers in this tradition is the system of gematria. Gematria, which you can hear, has a kind of Greek sound, and I think it is related to geometry or geometric something. I'm not sure. Maybe someone knows. But gematria is the system by which every Hebrew letter has a numerical value. And in fact, before we used what are they called? Not Roman numerals, but Arabic numerals. I forget what they're called. Someone knows. Before we used those number symbols, we used letters. Aleph was 1 and Bet was 2, and on through the alphabet. And what that means is that every letter has a numerical value and every word has a numerical value. And so that's a really juicy way to derive significance from numbers, is just to say, oh, well, this number, the number 18, what does the number 18 represent? Life. Because of Chai, because of Chet Yud, and Yud is 10 and Chet is 8. So that's the gematria, what they say, the gematria of life, Chai. And so that's like a classic, especially in the mystical tradition. And God's name is the number 26, and the word for heart is the number 32. And it's playing with all kinds of, that's a classic system of Jewish numerology. But the one that I want to, having named those two approaches, the approach I want to take today is the approach we usually take in this class, which is to try to situate the number in the discourse of the Torah, and to try to understand how this number recurs in the Torah. So when we say 40, we're not just thinking about the number 40. We're thinking about, oh, well, there were 40 days and 40 nights of the flood, and there were 40 days and 40 nights of Moses being on Mount Sinai. That must mean something. And let's think about what those two context are those two cases mean? Okay, you're probably familiar with that general approach that I take. So I want to do that with the number 8 today. And the number 8 is famous in our tradition in some ways, most of all because of its particular context here, but we'll soon zoom out. So did I put, yes, Noah just typed Brit Milah, and that is correct. Did I put the source sheet in I don't think I did that yet. Put that in. Okay, so let's look at the first source here. This is how Parshat Tazria opens up. And Parshat Tazria opens up with birth. That's its first topic. And then there's a very strange birth ritual. Again, I tried to make some sense of it, but even what I wrote this week doesn't make sense of all of it. There's all kinds of things going on here, purity and impurity and periods of time, and especially the distinction between male and female children, which has a whole different set of numbers. And that's very hard to understand. But one of the ways that we might understand that is to say, oh, well, one of the numbers that's different for male and female children is that male children are circumcised and we don't circumcise female children. So that starts to account for some of the differences, but let's read them here. Sorry. Here we are. Okay. The magic 8. The magic 8. Okay. So this is the beginning of our Parsha, Parshat Tazria. God spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the Israelite people. Isha ki Tazria, when a woman Tazria conceives, bears fruit, anyway, this is a very difficult word to translate. I actually ended up translating it as germinates because it's related to the word for seed. But in plain translation, when a woman conceives and bears a male, she shall be impure 7 days, meaning she can't come near the temple for 7 days. To make an offering, and then at the end of her period of impurity, she will make an offering. She shall be impure as at the time of her condition of menstrual separation. There are impurities for all kinds of bodily fluids, including menstrual blood. So that this parallels that time unit. And here's the time unit that we're going to be thinking about today. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Okay, that's the Brit Milah. That's the circumcision. It's a central ritual in our tradition, and we'll say more about it in a second. But let's just see the rest of the numbers, just so that you appreciate the sort of slew of seemingly random numbers that we get here. Especially 7 we know, and 8 actually we've seen before as well. We'll talk about that in a second. But then she shall remain in a state of blood purification. That's also a confusing term. For 33 days, she shall not touch any consecrated thing nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is completed. And if she bears a female, she shall be impure 2 weeks, that is 14 days, as during her menstruation, and she shall remain in a state of blood purification for 66 days. Now, what the heck is going on there? Well, folks, I figured it all out for you in the essay that I put in the chat. I hope I figured it out, or at least I made some attempt at figuring it out. All those numbers. But right now, I just want to think about the 8th day of circumcision, and I want to ask a basic question, which is why? Why is it on the 8th day? Why is it on the 8th day? And this is not like something that we can answer just by looking in this passage and the difference between male and female birth rituals. No, because circumcision is one of the few commandments that we got all the way back in Genesis. Abraham was first given the commandment to circumcise his all the males in his house, and all of those males were older than 8 days old. He has circumcised himself. He circumcised his son Ishmael. He circumcised all of the men who were in his household. And then he was told, and every male that is born you will circumcise on the 8th day. That is already part of the message. So it's like there's something about circumcision that is meant to be on the 8th day. Now, why is that? Anyone want to just let's just start with that. Do we have any strong sense of why 8 would be significant? If it was a child circumcised on the seventh day, circumcised a child on the seventh, that makes sense. That's like, and now the child is completely formed like the world itself. And on the seventh day, we consecrate that with a circumcision. Like, why don't we do, we can, by the way, circumcise on Shabbat, so that's not the problem. What do you think? Any thoughts? Hal, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it's maybe parallel to creation and Shabbat, that the day of circumcision is a kind of, I don't know, rest, a marker. I mean, it's
But it's the day after
but it's the
Shabbat.
day after. Excuse me,
But you can't circumcise on Shabbat.
Right.
You can circumcise on Shabbat.
Yeah.
Well, never mind. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. Hannah. Hannah, you out there? All right, let's move to Noah.
Yeah, on the 8 days, it's really like Al and Kathy were saying, like the 7 plus 1 for the week and the day, and and 8's just significant because it's multiples of 8 that are in the following numbers, or multiples of 8 plus 1, 2, or 3 that are in Tazria, and 8 sections, I believe, or maybe it was 6 sections of the Mishnah and 8 was something else. But there's all sorts of things with 8 that are in Achad B'Yodeya.
Okay, all right. All right, so Noah sort of like spreads out a bunch of possibilities for us. And one of those, I think probably the most intuitive one, and I thought Hal was going there, but Hal retracted. But I actually thought that Hal was onto something in saying what I also started to say, which is oh well, it's next to 7, and 7 is the most important number in Judaism, right? Besides maybe 1, right? Like one God. But other than that, 7's as classic, as resonant a number as you can find. So surely it must have something to do with being the day after the 7th day. Surely there's something about, oh, if creation is for 6 days and rest and reflection is the 7th day, then maybe you needed that cycle to get to the 8th day. Maybe there's some. So what comes after rest and reflection? I mean, that might be one way of thinking about it. Like there's a full cycle. So the 8th represents the beginning of a new cycle, or maybe like another day of rest. Great. So we're certainly going to do that kind of thinking. The proximity to 7 will matter to us. But let's hear a couple of more answers before we start doing some comparative work. Robin, what do you think?
I mean, doesn't this have something to do with the health of the child? And maybe we throw in 7. We get through the week. 7 is the most important number, but I mean, I imagine there was a lot of mortality at birth. And so maybe we're waiting until a full week to do this very, brutal ritual. So yeah, maybe that's it.
Okay, I'm so glad that I'm so grateful. I'm like obviously trying to seduce you all into coming up with symbolic connections, but somebody reminds us that maybe there's a very practical reason here. Robin says, look, you're going to cut into the skin of a child. You can't do that on the first day. Like, give it a break. Let it go a week. Let it just be a week. And then, okay, fine. I mean, that's pretty soon as it is. So yeah, that would be a more kind of not shot like literal, but practical, reasonable way of understanding this commandment. Let's try Hannah again.
Yeah, I put it in the notes, but we're from many years ago when I trained as a birth doula, we were taught that the body's natural painkiller, and I don't remember what it is, some opiate situation, kicks in on day 8. We're not the first people to be scientists and observe. Generations would have observed that there was a change in someone's, response to things on day 8. Really practical, natural killer. And I've not everybody has seen a Brit Milah where the baby does not cry, it's possible. It's not necessarily, it depends on many factors, but
yeah, I've seen one of those. It's like, who is this miracle baby? Like, it's, okay. So Hannah in a way takes us back to one of the other approaches we named at the outset, which is to say maybe we just don't understand. We don't have the full context, but there was either the Torah in divine wisdom is tuning into the natural world, and there actually something happens on the eighth day. It's what makes sense, or the Torah is a record of human wisdom and records something that people knew then, which was that the eighth day was significant. So that would be a way of, I'm not validating or denying that. I'm just saying you might, and I say this because what Hannah just did is what Maimonides often does, is to say, well, no, we don't understand, but if you follow the biology, the science, there's actually a very kosher laws are there, says Maimonides, because it's known that it's unhealthy for the body. Now, that's a particular approach to try to read the Torah into the natural world. And others would say, no, kosher laws are just what God said. So, okay, so that's a potential approach. Let me, before we get too carried away here, just riffing on 8, which I'm very happy to do. I hope you can tell that I enjoy this kind of work. But I want to employ some of the methods that we often use in this class, and that is in particular to notice repetition of phrases or key words in the Torah. And in this case, there is a very there's a very strong echo when we read the phrase Uvayom Hashmini, and on the eighth day, Uvayom Hashmini, on the eighth day, that word Shmini should at this point in the Torah in particular have a very strong resonance for us, right? I'm always trying to get us to train ourselves to listen for echoes in the Torah, but Shmini at this point in the Torah has a very strong echo. Why? Why does Shmini have a very strong echo?
We just read Parshat Shemini.
Good. Yeah, there are some questions where I don't call on people because but if someone will come in, then they get the bonus point. So thank you. I think that was Yonatan's voice. That's right. We just read Parshat Shemini last week. Parshat Shemini, that word means the eighth. The eighth. Why was that Parsha called the eighth? Well, something also happened on the eighth day just last week. So it feels to me that it's no coincidence that there's a Uvayom Hashmini here when we had a whole Parsha named Shmi. And I say no coincidence because we've already had the circumcision laws back in Genesis. We don't need them here. They feel a little bit like an interruption. And really, this is about the birthing mother and all of her rituals. Why is circumcision in there? So there is a kind of an echo that you can't help but hear to the beginning of last week's Parsha. So let's take a look at that, where we again have a very prominent eighth day. I'm just going to back up. This is actually 2 weeks ago, the Parsha ended like this. And what were we talking about? We were talking about the construction and the actual setting up of the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And they're about to get ready to inaugurate, to begin the procedures of offering sacrifices, to inaugurate the Mishkan. And in preparation, God tells them meaning Moshe, Aaron, and Aaron's sons, you shall not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days. So you just stay with God for 7 days until the day that your period of ordination is completed. Okay, so just note there's a 7 here, okay? And that shouldn't surprise us, but it's another 7 that will lead into 8. So that is distinct. Everything done today, God has commanded to be done to make expiation for you. You shall remain at the entrance of the tent of meeting day and night for 7 days, keeping God's charge that you may not die. For so I have been commanded. That's, I guess, Moshe talking to Aaron. And Aaron and his sons did all the things that Hashem had commanded through Moshe. Okay, that's the end of Parshat. I guess it would be Tzav, and then Parshat Shmini begins this way: on the 8th day, Bayom HaShmini, Moses called Aaron and his son and the elders of Israel, and he said to Aaron, and this begins we spent time thinking about these offerings last week, the calf and the goats, and why are they offering these things? These are the first offerings ever offered. The first sacrifices ever offered by the people of Israel in the system that will become the temple, eventually the temple sacrifices. Okay, so that's the context. But for our purposes, we're just trying to focus on this one line here, which took that it was so prominent that it became the name of last week's Parsha, the 8th day. And then just the next week's Parsha, we have 7 days and then the 8th day. So you know how I read the Torah. To me, that's begging to be interpreted. What is the connection there? If only in the just structural parallels, the 7 that culminates in the 8. But now the 8th is not the circumcision. Now the 8th is the day of inauguration of the tabernacle, of the sacrifices. And it is the day, let me just put one more thing up here. It is the day that God says, down here, for today I will appear to you. Ki hayom Hashem nireh alechem. That's pretty significant. So let's just do some of the work we often do in this class. What does the circumcision have to do with the tabernacle? Why the 8th day for the kid and the 8th day for the sacrifice? What parallels do you see there? Matt Silberstein? Matt, we're not hearing you well.
Not hearing me? Just a second. Just a second.
Now we are hearing you.
Weirdly. How about now?
Yeah, we're fine.
Okay, turning off my headphones. Normally, I think I say things that are not sort of in the normal path. I think I'm saying something absolutely obvious now, which is that circumcision is a sacrifice. They are the same thing. They are the same process of blood, which is this incredibly dangerous, powerful, enormous thing, is being used to connect people to God. And it's actually why I don't like impure as the translation. I like almost at risk or in between or something like that for what's going on. So I think this is just direct and clear. It's not, they did one thing and now we're doing another. These are the same thing.
Good. Okay, good.
It's just a continuation.
Okay, I'm glad someone named that. It's in some ways, as Matt says, obvious, and in some ways not obvious at all. There's something very radical about what Matt is saying, which is there seems the tabernacle and a circumcision. What do those things have? Well, there's cutting involved in both, right? Just to be basic about it. And as Matt says, there is the spilling of blood involved in both, and it's the spilling of blood in a kind of sacramental rite that brings holiness to, I mean, I guess we have to stop for a second and think about what circumcision is. I just throw the word holy out, but circumcision is, we call it a brit, a covenant. So it represents a covenant with God. Okay, that is, and a covenant is an agreement of, it's like a marriage is a covenant, and we call marriage kiddushin. So a covenant is a form of holiness. So it's an apt word, but circumcision is a covenant, and now sacrifices. There's also a kind of a blood spilling that maybe also forges a holy connection with God. So Matt says it's the same thing, and that suggests that it's almost like we're sacrificing our child to God. But instead of sacrificing our child, we're just going to sacrifice a little bit of blood. You know what I mean? Like, and that actually, that's one way, that's a sort of a deep literary way to understand circumcision in general. Like maybe by rights, you should sacrifice your child, and Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac. But instead, what you do is you just, but it doesn't, I'm calling that a tangent. I want to pull us back in here. But Matt's comparison is worth thinking about. Okay, let's keep going here. Yonatan.
I've lost you all on video. I don't know if you can still see me.
We can.
Well, cool. In a way, I'm not saying anything new, but I want to try to articulate this in a new way, that it's almost like it takes 7 days for anything to become real. Like we sit Shiva for a person for 7 days, and it's not like we're done grieving at 7 days, but hopefully by that time, like you don't look for that person when you wake up in the morning to be next to you in bed anymore. Like you've accepted that they're dead. We can't offer sacrifices in a temple until we've kind of accepted that this temple, well, not temple, the tabernacle, until we've accepted that this tabernacle exists. And maybe we can't circumcise a child until like we've had a week to sit with the fact that this child exists. Like maybe we haven't grasped the gravitas of this act until it's been a week.
That's great. Yeah, that you're right. You introduced it exactly right. You're saying something that, in a sense, we've said before. Like the 7th is a cycle of full completion, and then comes the 8th, and that. But you are saying it differently, which is to say that we really, first of all, you focused on the sort of the psychological kind of awareness and what it means to actually accept something as a new entity, a new created thing in the world, and that certainly seems like that must be a part of what's going on here, is the parents and the community and their relationship to this new creature. To let it be a full thing in the world before then it goes and starts taking on rituals, right? That's different. I mean, Robin and Hannah were suggesting that maybe you just need to let it actually exist and breathe and, not attack it so soon. But what Yonatan is saying is that
those two things are the same thing, right? It's not just that, like, well, in a way, it's a matter of like you perceiving that this child exists, and in a way, like this child is physically manifesting over this week. Those two things are really connected.
Great. Okay. And I think this is the right time to introduce the Maharal of Prague. The Maharal of Prague, who is really my favorite of the great Jewish philosophers. The Maharal of Prague it has a numerology all his own. That is, well, you'll see some of how it works here, but what the reason I want to introduce it at this moment is because I think it picks up nicely from what Yonatan and, in a sense, what Robin and Hannah were also saying, which is that the Maharal also thinks that the way we have to understand the number 8 in this tradition is to see it as the next step after 7, and to remember that 7 represents creation. Okay, we've sort of, as Yonatan said, we've all been sort of saying that, but the Maharal has like a kind of a particular spin on what that means for 8, and I share this with you as a classic piece of Torah that, if you haven't seen it before, it's a good thing to know, because every Hanukkah you will hear about this Maharal. Every Hanukkah you will hear about this Maharal, because that's another big 8 in the tradition. That's not actually one we're going to look at today, because Hanukkah comes later than the Torah. So you can take all of the work that we do today and feed it into your Hanukkah Torah. But today we're going to stick with the Torah's 8s. But the Maharal is just working with the number 8, and in fact, Maharal has a kind of symbolic assignment of meaning to every one of the first 10 numbers. But this is what he says for 8. So let's take a look here. The Maharal of Prague is famous for supposedly building the Golem in 16th century Prague, but he was a sort of a great Jewish thinker who blended the rationalism of the medieval period before him, like rational, philosophical, logical thinking, with the mysticism that was growing and would really be dominant in the period after him. So he's sort of a bridge between rationalism and mysticism, and he's really a favorite of mine. So let's take a look what the Maharal of Prague says. This is a classic. Talk about numerology. Maharal's numerology is one to put in your files. Okay, as we have explained in many places, and so you can tell he's into this. He's explained it in many places. The commandments of the Torah are on a level above nature. On a level above nature. That will be important. Now he's going to do just a cool thing that I just couldn't resist but sharing. In Psalm 19, it says, Hashamayim misaprim kavod el. The heavens declare the glory of God. That's nature. And then in verse 8, it says, but the Torah of God is perfect. That means there are 7 verses from the beginning of the psalm, and then comes the Torah of God is perfect. For the ways of nature were fashioned during the 7 days of creation, whereas the Torah is above nature on the 8th level. Now, let me just stop for a sec there and say, it's not because of the psalm. The psalm is just like a cute way of making the, look what I found. This psalm basically said, it's really, as far as the Maharal is concerned, it's the internal logic of the numbers as they appear in the Torah's scheme. So if 7 represents creation, then we've been saying this in various ways. Oh, then 8 comes right after creation. What does that mean for the Maharal? It's not right after creation, it's above creation. Lamala min hateva. Lamala min hateva. And I see Arlene's got a thought here. So I'm going to finish the Maharal and I'm going to come back to you. So take a look at the way that's his basic understanding of 8, and take a look at the way he reads it. Remember, he said all the Torah is above creation. So there's nature and there's Torah. Nature's 7 and above nature is 8. And here's what he says about Brit Milah. And so it is for everything that is quote unquote above nature. This is a fixing of whatever is lacking in nature. You know what? This is a whole new point. I want to hear from Arlene first. We're going to have to spend time on this point separately. Let's just like try to digest this idea that 8 represents a level above nature. Arlene, did you have a thought that you wanted to?
Yeah, I do. Well, I was reading about Chabad believes that the number 8 is a new beginnings.
New beginning.
So, yeah. So you have creation, and then like when you talked about before, the connection between the sacrifice and the last portion, and about the Brit, is the idea of that the Brit Milah is a covenant with God, and the sacrifice is above that. I mean, so I mean by that is it's supernatural. You can't really explain our connection in the covenant with God.
Good. Okay, good. So to read Arlene's thoughts together with the Maharal's, you might say there is a natural cycle of creation. That's 7 days. And, the world was created in 7 days, but we think of all 7-day periods as the full, growth of a natural thing. And even a newborn baby, though it's obviously spent 9 months gestating, let it grow for 7 days, let it have a full natural week. And then, as Arlene put it, then we will begin a new creation cycle, but this will be a spiritual creation. So the 8th day would instead of being the culmination, it would be the beginning of a new cycle that is not natural, but supernatural. Okay, so that's fair. That's the one way of thinking about it. Okay, the Maharal says 8 is above nature. Now, what does he mean by that? I started to read this and I wanted to just pause and digest a little more, because what he actually says here, I think is like, it's going to, in a way, flip everything we've been talking about on its head. Because what he says about, in particular, the Brit Milah, look at this. And so it is for everything that is above nature. And this is a fixing of whatever is lacking in nature when it reaches 7. Now that's really interesting language. V'hu tikun, like tikun olam, fixing, that's this word here. Hu tikun, mashe chaser hateva. So nature, or chasar hateva probably, because it's a verb there. Nature is lacking something, and the 8th is there to complete whatever is lacking. Now that's a wild thing to say. We're going to return to that. that is the reason that circumcision is on the 8th day, because by nature, a male is created with a foreskin, which is the diminishment of nature. Now, some people would disagree with that, right? Like, I've definitely heard people rail against circumcision and say, no, babies are born perfect. But this is the way the Maharal sees it. It is pritut hateva. It's some diminishment, some lesser form of nature. It's occluded, we would say, in our tradition. The orla is, like Moses says, that he is arel sfatayim. He is of occluded lips. He can't speak properly because he has some occlusion. So it is with the foreskin, which is the diminishment of nature. So the circumcision is the repair of nature. And that's why this repair takes place on the 8th day, because it comes after nature, which was created in 7 days. Okay, now, this is really something to process here. I mean, there's a lot here. First of all, there's the general, when you hear the Maharal quoted on Hanukkah, it's always 8 represents above nature. 8 represents above nature. That is his basic symbolism. 8, there's 7 is the nature, 8 is above nature. But what he says about it is sort of startling. It's not above nature because it's nature plus. It's actually, in a sense, it's nature minus. Like, we talk about repairing the world, but what he's saying is it's not necessarily that we add to the world that's the language he uses. Nature is missing something and we have to fix it. But the way we fix it is actually by taking something away. So I'm not sure that that would be true for every 8 that the Maharal identifies, but it's certainly true for the most prominent one, that 8 represents some level above nature, which sounds beautiful, except in order to get to that level, you actually have to take something away from nature. And that's a kind of symbolism that, well, I want to hear what your thoughts, because that's hard for me to make sense of. Let's hear from Ariella. Do you want to? Yeah.
What the circumcision reminds me of is the klipot, the separation, with the sphirot, that there is something separate from.
Brilliant. Ariella comes in hot with some Kabbalah for us all. And that's exactly right. What a brilliant connection. So let me just explain what Ariella is saying in very kind of cryptic language here. Klipot are, the word she used are husks, klipot. And this is a huge term in Kabbalah, in especially the Kabbalah of the Arizal. It becomes like a very big term. And there's an idea that that the light of the world, the holiness of the world, the essence of the world, mostly in like projected in the form of light, it's covered over with klipot, with things that are hiding the light. Because a big part of Jewish mystical thinking is that God is everywhere and yet God is hidden. So we have to discover it. And the language that they use, and it's actually very strange language. Why are they so obsessed with husks? Like, it's very kernels of grain language. That's they love this metaphor that everything, there's grain everywhere, there's nutrients everywhere, there's light everywhere, but it's covered in husks. And so you have to get rid of the klipot. And I think this is what do you do when you somebody knows, like with wheat, do you shuck or do you shell? You like get rid of the husks. And I obviously have spent all my life in a Beit Midrash and know nothing. But that's the idea, is that you have to reveal the light and you have to reveal God's holiness by getting rid of the dross, the klipot, that which obscures. And in Kabbalistic discourse, the klipot then become like the evil forces, the bad forces, the things that are blocking you from the light. So anyway, that's like a footnote, all of which to explain Ariella's very brilliant connection here, because that's part of it. I think the Maharal would agree completely. The foreskin is it's like a husk. It's like an occlusion it's blocking. And, in some literal way, you might see it as blocking, the function of this thing. I mean, not really. Obviously, people function with a foreskin, but there's the symbolism is that the world the natural order is beautiful, but not perfect. And it needs like tikkun, it needs adjustment. I guess I'm also just wondering, what do you think of that concept that the world needs fixing at all? I mean, it's now become so popular in our, in our vernacular, Jewish vernacular, that we say, oh, fixing the world, fixing the world, fixing the world. Usually that means doing good deeds, making the world a better place. But in the Maharal's formulation, it means the world is not perfect as it is, and it needs a tweaking. And in this case, what it needs is an untweaking, a kind of removal of something. Okay, let's hear from Kathy.
Okay, so what I'm really struck with here is this notion of the 7 days of whatever it is, creation, and then you come to this kind of point at which, like you say, there's a kind of completion, or there's this, anyway, it's a kind of a turning point. And I think all these, it can be very sort of this very kind of beautiful image of this completion and a super, spirituality or whatever. But it also seems to me that this is also in the context of purification. Like, why is it that we need purification at this point? And it reminds me of this great essay by Rachel Adler on the need for purification at these nexus points between life and death. So it's sort of like when you reach that point, that kind of turning point, and say there isn't a death or there is a death, you need to recognize just the danger of that point. It's this purity and danger, the
Mary Douglas, right?
Yeah. Sort of idea. And so I think that's, clearly the birth of a child is a nexus point between life and death. And reaching the 8th day is a kind of nexus point. And then this whole section of Tazria is about, the purification of the mother, at these kinds of nexus points. So I just wanted to introduce that. I don't think it contradicts the other views, but it kind of adds to it that, you can have completion and you can also have death.
Yeah. Okay. That's very, very helpful. First of all, just bringing us back into the context of the birth rituals themselves, and they're not just an abstraction of numbers. There's all kinds of things happening there that have values attached to them. We're talking about purity and impurity, or at least states of being, death and life and blood. Like, let's really think about what's happening here and what is being marked, what kind of ritual is being marked, a new life, but also a danger and a potential death, and the proximity of life to death in these sorts of rituals. I think, honestly, I appreciate you saying all of that, Kathy. I think I avoided that in part because just as a man, I'm like a little bit hesitant to like assign all of the meaning to these rituals that will be performed by women. So I sort of focused on the numbers. But I want to just say that there's an incredible connection that your comments are pushing us toward, which is another circumcision moment in the Torah, where Moses is called back to Egypt, and he's writing, and on the way, it's a very strange scene in Exodus. An angel of God comes and tries to kill them. It's not clear, but seems to kill their child, Gershom, and Zipporah, Moses' wife, runs in and cuts the baby's foreskin. And then the angel retreats. Now, again, that would need a whole class to process, but your comments remind me of that. Like, circumcision in that moment seems to be the thing. It's like there is some occlusion, and it's the thing that saves the baby, as if the baby is hanging in the balance between life and death. I don't know how, like, we have 7 minutes to this class, and I wish we had 8. And we had 7 minutes to this class, and we won't be able to unpack all of that. But Kathy's comments are really pointing us to some of the some of the really bigger themes and the high stakes and the values that are present before us whenever we're thinking about these birth or death rituals. And again, birth and death being things that are often hovering in the balance together. Okay, let's hear from Leah.
I want to go back to klipot or husks. I live in a rice culture. Grain needs to be husked. In order for the nutrition to be available to us. The husks are not useless, but in order for us to be completely available to the divine and for the divine to be available to us, we need to have that outer shell removed like a rice husk. It's how we take in the spiritual nutrition.
There's a really important sort of spiritual reflection point here, and Leah's doing a good job of articulating it for us or bringing us there. This idea that Maharal has put out, that Ariella built on with the klipot, this idea that maybe our fixing the world, sure, but fixing ourselves. Like, we do inner spiritual work. We come to Yom Kippur and we might think, I often think when I think about myself and what's lacking, I think about the things I don't have. I'm not as strong or smart or good looking as it's like, I think about the things I want to add to myself. But there's a different kind of spiritual reflection. Like, what do I need to take away? What is blocking me? What am I holding on to in myself that maybe I would be better off without? Like, what do I need to quote unquote circumcise? And that's like that's a startling question, but also a powerful one in a way. Okay, I think we have time for 1 or 2 more comments. Marlene. We can't hear you, Marlene. Unmute.
I've also been thinking about humility in this transition from 7 to 8, and that we can't necessarily be so sure that just because we've created something or we've done something on the 7, which is supposed to be the great number, that we have to be humble about that it might not be so perfect. So it's not just, so the idea that the Torah lifts us up after 7 days or whatever it is we've done that we've created, a child, a relationship, a piece of art, and the artist, you're never done, but somebody will say it's perfect. And that the notion that you have to be humble in the face of your striving for perfection and know that there's something beyond that, and that would be the 8.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right, Marlene, that there's okay, so first of all, the way Marlene puts it, I find easy to digest. Like, you're not perfect, and you got to strive, and you got to go above and be, and that version of it is a message that makes sense to me. The version of it, just to like layer onto the version of it that emerges from the language of the Maharal is a little more challenging to me, but it's still what Marlene is saying, which is that there does seem to be some notion in our tradition that nature is not enough. And that's challenging for some people. I think I could imagine voices that voices I've heard from parents around circumcision. My baby is born perfect. Why would I have to alter my child? I get that. We are born perfect. Nature, there's something intuitive to imagining that nature gives you exactly things as they should be. The natural order is the right order. There's something that I find very resonant about that. And yet there's something in this scheme, this idea of transcending nature, that suggests that no, maybe nature's not perfect as it is. Maybe we're not perfect as we are. Maybe the world needs an extra level, a push beyond. Maybe that's what humanity is here for, is to add to nature. Unfortunately, humanity is often ruining nature. So I don't think that's the tweak that God is hoping for. But we are here to be la'avda l'shamra, to work the land and to guard it. And maybe we're here to bring something that is, the natural order is this perfect thing that God created, but maybe not perfect. Maybe we're here to make it perfect, or to make it a little more perfect. Okay. This is just beautiful work you've all done today. I've heard just so much brilliant analysis. And I'll just leave you with one last reference point to contemplate. One last big 8 in the Torah is not Hanukkah. Now, Hanukkah is not in the Torah. And for the moment, I'm not interested in Hanukkah, not just because it's not in the Torah, but also because Hanukkah is just 8 days. Whereas every other one we've seen is 7 plus 1. There's another 7 plus 1 in the Torah, and that is Shmini Atzeret. We have a whole holiday, mysterious holiday, that we actually don't even know exactly what it's for. It's called the 8th day. The 8th day of stopping after the... So let me just read it to you. It's a holiday. I've done a whole class on this before because the holiday itself doesn't seem to have a lot of meaning. We don't know why we have it. But what I want us to do is to think about this holiday now in light of the hour conversation we've had about what it is to go from 7 to 8. So the holiday follows Sukkot. Sukkot is 7 days. And here is the holiday. God spoke to Moses saying, say to the Israelite people, on the 15th day of this 7th month, remember the 7 being a big month, shall be the feast of Sukkot to God, to last 7 days. The first day shall be a sacred occupation. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall bring offerings of fire to God. And on the 8th day, same phrase we've been tracking. That's Bayom Rishon, sorry. I highlighted the wrong one. Here it is. Bayom HaShmini, on the 8th day. It's a nice pazer to emphasize it. Bayom HaShmini. Okay. On the 8th day, you shall observe a sacred occasion and bring an offering by fire to God. It is a solemn gathering, and you should not work at your occupations. Okay, so that's that holiday. It's 1 o'clock. We're not going to spend time analyzing it, though we could. But I just want to leave you with that. All of the thinking that we've done should help inform our sense of what that Yom HaShmini is. And yes, it should also inform our sense of what Hanukkah is. And yes, it should also inform our sense of what circumcision is. But in a bigger sense, it should challenge us to think about what it means to live in a natural world and to consider maybe moving one step beyond. What would it mean to transcend nature just one level? What would that take, either inside or outside of us? So lots of questions to contemplate as we head into Shabbat. I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom tomorrow, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
8
Thank
days,
you.
right? All right. Bye, everyone.